Hello. My job today is to walk you through some of the numbers and to try to give you insight into some of what we found over the last year when we presented the last report card to you. I think it's really important to know that we've seen some improvements, although they've been small. We've seen other areas where there's growing concern, and I think that we really have to look at these numbers and the patterns behind these numbers to look at what we can do together to actually reverse this trend, to actually eliminate child poverty. Why is that important? Because every child we're able to lift out of poverty means one less child going to bed hungry and one more child realizing their full potential. As I walk you through the numbers, I want you to reflect on the importance of that. I also feel it's a real privilege to be here with the other panelists because what I'm seeing are individuals coming. Sorry, we can barely hear you. Then we better try again. No worries. I'll try. Better? Perfect. I was talking about the importance of the numbers and also the importance of the people who are here today, because what you're seeing is that people from across sectors are coming together and saying, this isn't right. We have to look at this in a real and concerted way across all sectors, across all of our communities, and see what we can do to make this better. So I will start walking through the numbers. I'll begin with the total number of people in poverty in BC. The rate of poverty was 15.5%. I like to translate that into the number of individuals, and what you see in terms of that is that there were 688,000 individuals in BC living in poverty, and this was pretty well the highest rate in all of Canada. You actually see that the after-tax measure improves, and that's good news. That means that what we're doing is working, that the types of interventions that are in place actually do result in improvements. So it raises a really important question of, if it's working, why aren't we doing more of it? What you see when you look at the after-tax measure is that the number of people living in poverty in BC went from 688,000 in 2010 to 510,000. It's still more than 500,000 people living in poverty and low income. When you put the lens of children onto that, you actually see that in BC in 2010, there were still 119,000 children living in poverty at the last time. And after tax, there were 87,000 children living in poverty. It's a slight improvement over the previous period where there were 137,000 children in poverty, but you're still looking today at about 119,000 children in poverty and low income. After tax, there was a reduction of about 13,000 children and families, and that's good news. That's the type of thing we're talking about in terms of it's important to see more of this and that we know we can do better. So I'll walk you through the individual fact sheets and draw your attention to some of the key pieces that we believe provide the roadmap forward and what the numbers that we have to look at in terms of trying to make the improvements that we know we have to make. You'll see that the first fact sheet actually presents these numbers, the number of children living in low income, the number of individuals in BC living in low income, and some of the provincial comparisons. The second fact sheet actually provides a picture of the changes over time, and it compares us to the national average. You'll actually see, if you look at the graph on this fact sheet, at one point in time, BC was actually doing much better than it is, but over the last decade, for sure, there's been an important lag, where BC has had significantly higher rates than the national average, and even though they're improving, we're still above the national average, although the good news is that it is getting slightly better. The third fact sheet is called child poverty by family type. Here there's another important and concerning trend. It's the trend around the number of two-parent family households. We were fully aware that single-parent family households were lagging in many ways, that there was such a high incidence of poverty and low income among female-led single-parent families. But what you see is actually two-thirds of all children living in poverty today in BC are actually living in two-parent family households. That's the potential for two incomes, but they could be very low incomes, or there could be other barriers preventing these households from gaining access to the types of opportunities they need. When you look at what this means in terms of the types of opportunities, it's simple, and Adrian talked a lot about that. It's education, it's affordable childcare, it's affordable housing. It really is what we all want, just to get that basic chance in life, and I think that it's really important to look at. It isn't just single-parent families relying on a single income that are living in poverty and children living in these households. It's all families. When you put these numbers the lens on these numbers, you actually see that there were 68,000 children in two-parent family households in 2010 who were living in poverty and low income. There were another 20,000 living in single-parent, female-led single-parent family households, and 21,000 that were in other types of family arrangements. And this again can show the types of stresses and pressures on family households. These could be living with their grandparents in multifamily arrangements, male-led households. But what you do want to understand is that each family deserves the chance to succeed. And so I feel that this is an important piece to look at around what is happening to these two-parent family households, what's preventing them from having the kind of opportunity or their children having the kind of opportunity they deserve. We'll go to the fact sheet number 4, which is actually about the depth of poverty. And here you start to see some of the situation for these families and households in terms of how deep that gap has become, what the income of a family living in low income is. And this is really important in terms of actually understanding what has to be done to help a family and household move out of poverty and have a basic living wage, a basic income that you need to succeed in society today. I think that if you look at our average earnings across BC, average earnings were about $20 an hour. A family living in poverty and low income who is earning has an average wage of about $13 an hour. It's better than the minimum wage, but you can still see some of the gaps and pressures that these households will face. You'll see that there are really good and important income numbers in this fact sheet, and you'll also see the depth of need, the gap that would have to be closed in order to help these families actually have the kinds of life chances that they and their children deserve. Tied to this is also then use on reliance on other supportive services like the food bank. A hunger count was released by the Food Bank Association of Canada, and the BC statistics have shown what we probably would expect, that food bank usage is going up. And tied to that is also a high number of children who are now dependent on this kind of social safety net service as part of their daily lives. The stats show that there were about 96,000 individuals across BC in 2012 that were relying on the use of food banks, and about 28,000 of these were children. Fact sheet 5 is another important one in terms of actually working poor. And again, this is really important because what it means is that having a job doesn't mean that you're going to escape poverty. And I think that that's a sad reality when you think that a huge number of families with children, in fact, I believe the number is 43%, were actually living in a household where one adult was working full time. But that alone was not enough to lift this household out of poverty. And you see that that's an important trend and an area that we have to look at both in terms of public policy and the types of measures that we take to try to address those types of needs. Number 6 is actually about the dependence on the social safety net. These are welfare programs, and it's been long known that BC's income assistance levels are low and falling behind many other provinces. This contributes to the child poverty problem that we see. A single-parent family who's relying on income assistance is living on about $17,121 a year, and that includes a lot of federal transfers in that number. That's not enough for a household in BC to be able to have the kinds of opportunities that are needed. Two-parent families aren't doing any better. I'm just pulling the number up for a family of 4 that's relying on an income assistance is likely living on about $25,000 a year. And again, you can see some of the types of stresses and pressures. Here there are movements within government that are promising, but they're not going far enough. You can look at earnings exemptions, but you have to look at how you really make those work. If you make small incremental gains in that area, it may not be enough. If you were to actively look at your policies and look at how you could remove any sorts of barriers, there could be more improvement in that area. Likewise, affordable childcare, one of our other speakers will speak to that, is another critical piece. Childcare is estimated to cost between $9,000 and $14,000 a year, and this can really affect a household's budget. It translates into between $750 and $1,200 a month. For me, fact sheet number 7 is also incredibly meaningful. Fact sheet number 7 actually talks about the flow, the number of individuals or families that are moving in and out of poverty. It's encouraging when you take a long-term perspective to know that a family that's in low income and in poverty today may not be in low income and in poverty in the next year or the following year. But there are some who are also trapped in poverty. If you look at the data that was presented, looking at the difference between the last report card and this report card, the numbers show that there were approximately, I have to pull this number because it's really important, there were actually 64,000 children who were in low income in both years. So out of the 119,000 children who were living in low income, 64,000 have had that for the last 2 years. You saw that there was actually an improvement for 29,000 children where they were able to move out of poverty, and that's tremendous news. That's the kind of thing we want to see. But you saw another 20,000 children move into poverty. So it's important to look at what are the types of strategies that can prevent those from falling into poverty, and what are the types of strategies and approaches that could actually lift more families and individuals out of poverty. Fact sheet 8 actually talks about the growing income inequality, and there's a tremendous graph on page 21 that actually shows the differences in the incomes of households at the low end of the income distribution and those at end of the income distribution. What you actually learn from this fact sheet is that the level of income polarization within BC is significant, and that the gap between those at the low end and high end is huge. Those at the high end of the income distribution actually have an income that is almost 14 times greater than those at the low end. You also see that those at the low end haven't made the same types of gains. And so where all other costs in BC have continued to rise, you start to see more and more pressure on those who have fewer resources to actually deal with those kinds of needs. Fact sheet 9 amplifies the message that government transfers really do help. Without government transfers, there would have been more than 225,000 children in poverty and low income in BC at this time. But because of the types of programs and services that we know are working, that number is at 119,000. The important question is, if we know they're working, why don't we do more of it? Why don't we actually try to reduce that 119,000 down to zero? And that leads then finally to that there is a cost to this. That if you actually look at fact sheet number 10, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has actually tried to quantify the cost of inaction. And I think some of our other speakers will also start to speak to that fact. As a society, there are costs in terms of the use of emergency and crisis services, costs to the healthcare system, costs in many different areas to the province, as well as the cost of the lost potential and productivity as you limit people in how they can actually participate in community life and in the workforce. You'll see that there are many recommendations. I think many of you already know what these types of recommendations are around just having the basic social and physical infrastructure that everyone needs to get ahead. Access to education, good employment, a living wage, good quality jobs, affordable childcare, affordable housing. We know that we can do better in these things. We know that there has been a lag in certain areas, and we believe that if we work together, we really could make a difference. So I thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. And we can just reinforce the recommendations there at the end are very specific, and we're calling on government to raise and index the minimum wage, raise welfare rates, so all of those things that we know are working, but we could do some more of them.